so I'll be more straight up. So, as Sandra said, we have a decision, and Joe Biden is the president-elect. He won the popular vote by more than 5.7 million right now, and that number keeps ticking up as a lot of absentee and early ballot votes are counted. The Electoral College looks like it's going to be finalized at 306 votes for Biden, 232 for Donald Trump. But there were a lot of close things in here. One thing, if there were, a few of these races were pretty tight. If you were to switch 100,000 votes in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Georgia, Trump would win. So there were some tight races here, and that impacted the Electoral College, but that's not happening. So also right now, depending on what happens on two runoff races in Georgia on January 5th, it looks like Republicans have held the Senate. So we're going to have a Democratic president, most likely a Republican Senate, and Democrats retain the House. They have lost about 7 seats in the House, at least at this point, and likely a few more when all the final counting is done, but I'm going to get into a little more detail with that. I think, as folks may have heard, the polls, well, they were a little bit off this year, kind of like 2016. So really made things a lot more exciting. I'll talk just a little bit about the presidential race. So just talking about the polls, when I've done some of this stuff prior to the election, I talked about using like the 538 website and their modelers who model all these different polls and come up with statistics. And they gave Biden, just before the election, an 89% chance to win the presidency, which he did. He held every state that Hillary Clinton won in 2016, and then he added what used to be called the blue wall states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and then he also added the Sun Belt state of Arizona and kind of Sun Belt southern Old South state of Georgia. So things were definitely different this time around. Right now, Biden's 360 electoral votes. He also has a little over 79 million popular votes. Trump's 232 electoral votes brought him a little over 73 million votes. So Biden is ahead by over 5.7 million votes, and that number is likely to go up. It's going to tick a lot closer to 6 million when it's all said and done. A little bit of a trivial tidbit is Joe Biden won the highest percentage of the popular vote against an incumbent president of anyone since FDR in 1932 beat Herbert Hoover. So if anyone happens to talk to Donald Sr. or Donald Jr., please pass that little bit of trivia on to them. I'd like them to remember that. So not since FDR beat Herbert Hoover has there been such a lopsided loss for an incumbent president. A little bit about what this means for us. So president gets about 4,000 political appointments. About 1,200 of them are Senate confirmation. The vast majority don't need to have Senate confirmation. So there are going to be a number of appointments that are going to be coming up in the next few months that are likely to impact our watershed and the work we do. The director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is going to be a key appointment for us. That person's boss, who is the Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks in the Department of Interior, is also a key position. The Secretary of Interior, naturally, EPA Administrator, the regional administrators for EPA Region 2 and 3 are going to probably have a big impact as well for our watershed. And also some key positions at USDA, also Army Corps of Engineers. Those kind of things will impact our work and our watershed to varying degrees. There are also a lot of things, I think, as we know, as we saw, not only in the Trump administration, but the Obama administration, administrations can do a lot of things by executive action. They can set a lot of policy, and they can also reverse a lot of policy. So a lot of the things that have been done by the Trump administration, many of them are going to be reversed on day one of the Obama administration. Many will have to go through a regulatory process as well to undo them. And if the Republicans retain the Senate, the Biden administration is likely to have to pursue a lot of policy changes via executive action as well. And again, they don't have the same permanence as legislation does. When something is signed into law, it's a lot more permanent than an executive action. So there will be some things that many of us don't like that will be reversed, and there may be some things that we will like that will be coming down the pike, but they will be reversible as well. By the way, if Sandra, I don't know how you want to do this. If folks want to ask me questions at any point, I'm happy to take a break and try and answer.
Yeah, folks can feel free to ask your question in the chat box, or feel free to take yourself off mute as well.
So I just looked at the chat box. I have a hard time doing this and looking at the chat box at the same time, but Rita asked if there's any chance of reversing the dirty water rule, and that is definitely going to be high on the agenda of the Biden administration. But that's one of those, I'm pretty sure they can't just reverse. They're going to have to go through a regulatory process to change that. So that is definitely high on a lot of people's lists. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the Senate. So the 538 website said that the Senate had a 70% chance of flipping from Republican to Democratic control. So far, that does not seem to be a good call, but it ain't over yet. Right now, the Republicans have a 53-47 majority in the Senate. That's this Congress, 116th. That will end on January 3rd. Democrats flipped 2 seats. They flipped Arizona and Colorado, and Republicans flipped 1 seat. They flipped the Alabama seat held by Doug Jones. So Democrats made a net gain of 1. So right now, the Senate is looking like it will be 52-48, but that depends on the 2 runoff races in Georgia on January 5th. I also have no real knowledge of why they have this special election on January 5th, which occurs after the new Congress convenes on January 3rd. But anyway, as soon as those election results are final, whether it's Warnock and or Ossoff or Perdue and or Loeffler, they're going to just take their seats in the new Congress, in the 117th Congress. Here in the Delaware watershed, we had 2 senators who were up for re-election. Chris Coons from Delaware and Cory Booker from New Jersey, both, they were not expected to have tough races, and they didn't. This was a year, one of the reasons why there was a lot of speculation that Democrats might flip the Senate is basically approximately 1/3 of the Senate is up every 2 years for re-election. And in the past decade, it's kind of funny, 20 years ago, if you were an incumbent senator, you were viewed to have an extreme advantage to be re-elected over your opponent. As of the past decade, it's totally reversed. Now, if you're up for re-election, it's viewed that you're vulnerable to lose. So this cycle, there were 35 senators up for re-election. 23 of them were Republicans. So back in the olden days of 15, 20 years ago, that would have been viewed as a great Republican year. But these days, it's viewed as being very vulnerable, and the Democrats have a great chance to flip the Senate. And they did have a very good chance, but it somehow doesn't seem to have happened. There were a lot of races with Republican incumbents that were basically viewed to be toss-ups, a whole bunch of them. And even coming right down to election day, the polls had them pretty like within 2 points, one way or the other. And they didn't prove to wind up that way. In Maine, Susan Collins won by 9 points. In Montana, Steve Daines won by 10 points. Joni Ernst in Iowa won by 8 points. Lindsey Graham in South Carolina won by 10 points. There was a lot of enthusiasm that Jamie Harrison was going to possibly flip that seat. In the end, it wound up not even close. Also in the end, there was one Democratic incumbent, Gary Peters in Michigan, who he was pretty much rated as lean Democratic. They knew it was not going to be, an overwhelming reelection, but they thought he was going to win. And kind of along the same lines, Doug Jones from Alabama, a Democrat who everyone thought was going to lose, that was always rated as lean Republican. Gary Peters squeaked out a really close race. He won by 1.5% in Michigan. And Doug Jones in the lean Republican race in Alabama got totally blown out. He lost by 20 points to Tommy Tuberville, football coach, former football coach. Anyway, we've got the 117th Congress coming, and there could be a few changes that just of note for us. So because Republican conference has rules, this is both the House and the Senate, that their committee chairs and their committee ranking members are term limited to 3 consecutive terms, and then they have to cycle off. Often they recycle, they'll move from one committee chair to another one. And that's partially what's happening in the Senate. So if the Republicans retain control, the Environment and Public Works Committee, which is the key committee for us, that's what Fish and Wildlife Service goes through when the DBR, when the Delaware River Basin Conservation Act is up for reauthorization, it will go through the Environment and Public Works Committee. And John Barrasso from Wyoming will no longer be chair. He's moving over to the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia will be the chair of Environment and Public Works Committee. She represents West Virginia, definitely a fossil fuel state, but I've worked with Shelley Moore Capito even back when she was a House member. She's actually very reasonable, and I think all in all is going to be better for all of our issues over John Barrasso. And Tom Carper also will retain being the ranking minority member. In the outside chance that Democrats flip both those Georgia seats, then there will be big changes. Then Tom Carper would be chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee. Also, another change in the Senate committee chair is the Senate Ag Committee. Pat Roberts from Kansas is retiring. So John Boozman from Arkansas is going to be the new chair of the Senate Ag Committee, assuming Republicans retain the Senate. Also, as we approach the 117th Congress, we know there's going to be at least one change as a result of the election, and that is Kamala Harris is going to be vice president. She's a sitting senator from California, so that will be an open seat. So Governor of California has the authority to appoint the new senator, which he has been saying is, most people would think this is the greatest thing to be able to do in the world, but he said it's actually the toughest because I'm going to piss off way more people than I make happy. So that's going to be an issue there for who the new senator is from California. There's also some issues about when the appointment is made. Kamala Harris can be senator through January 20th when she gets sworn in as vice president. But if Newsom appoints a senator, then that senator is going to have less seniority than anyone because new senators in 117th Congress start January 3rd. So she may resign her Senate seat prior to that. She may resign her Senate seat prior to January 3rd, so that person would get seniority. But then she's also getting intelligence reports that Vice President-elect Biden can't get because of the lack of recognition by the Trump administration that there's a transition. All very bizarre stuff. Also, pardon?
Peter, before you got too far out, doesn't California have some weird rule about like geography with replacing their senators? Like the senator has to be from Northern California or something because that's where she's from.
It may be a tradition. I have never heard of that rule.
Okay, maybe it's a tradition out there or something. I thought I read that somewhere, but all right.
I did see something that actually Newsom was being pressured to appoint someone from Los Angeles because Southern California has been left out because Senator Feinstein is from San Francisco. She's a former mayor.
Maybe that's what it was. Maybe I heard the same thing. Maybe it was Southern, not Northern.
Yeah, they're looking at geographic diversity, but it's subjective and there's no requirement as far as I know. Another thing about Senate vacancies is, who Biden may appoint to his cabinet. There's been some speculation. It's been rumored that Chris Coons from Delaware is on a short list to be Secretary of State. He was asked last weekend if he would take that position, and his response was, well, I just got reelected to represent the people of Delaware, which is my first priority. But if I was asked, I would say yes. So personally, I found that troubling because I love having Chris Coons as senator from Delaware in our watershed. But we'll see. And of course, then you go to the next step is, well, who will John Carney appoint? And Lisa Blunt Rochester, the House member, seems like a very probable appointment to the Senate, which of course then means there's going to be a special election for the House seat in Delaware. But we'll see if we go there. Also, there have been some names. Outgoing Senator Tom Udall from New Mexico, his name has surfaced as a lead candidate for Secretary of Interior. And then by the same token, Martin Heinrich, who's the other senator from New Mexico, who is still a sitting senator, that his name's also surfaced Secretary of Interior. But we won't know until all these things happen, and then there'll be all kinds of stuff. That's one thing that also will probably provide Biden some cover in not appointing Bernie Sanders to the Senate. Bernie's been pretty open that he'd like to have a cabinet post, but there's a Republican governor in Vermont. So if Bernie was to be appointed, the Republican governor would fill that seat. Same thing in Massachusetts with Elizabeth Warren, although as they've done in the past, Democrats control the Massachusetts legislature. They've actually passed legislation exempting the governor from making an appointment on a temporary basis. That seems like a lot to go through, and Biden will probably have some cover in not appointing them, both of whom might be difficult to get through, especially Elizabeth Warren for Senate confirmation if McConnell is still majority leader. Anyway, that's it for the Senate. I'm going to move on to the House, unless any other questions on the Senate. Nikki?
Peter, I was just wondering, I'm sorry, I apologize if you had mentioned this earlier, but in the unlikely event that the Dems do take control of the Senate, do you know who would be potential new chairs for Ag and I guess Interior, or the subcommittee on Interior Probes?
The Senate Ag Committee would probably be Stabenow from
Michigan.
Interior Probes. Who's a ranking member now?
Is that Coons or Carper?
No, Carper's not on a Probes. Coons is not a ranking member on any of the subcommittees. Well, I could tell you. Interior Probes. Oh, Tom Udall's ranking, but he's leaving.
Okay.
So then it could be Feinstein or it could be Jack Reed from Rhode Island.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks.
Welcome. Yeah, and I guess, I'm not sure how that, I don't think, so Murkowski, no, I think she could still, she'll still stay there. She'll still be on a post. But anyway, on the House. So 538 again gave a 94% probability that the Democrats would retain the House, which they did. Currently, there's 232 Democrats, 197 Republicans, 1 independent, and 5 open seats in the House. It's a Democratic majority of somewhere like 17, 18 spots. Democrats have lost at least 7 seats. It's likely to go higher. Still not sure. A lot of races in New York are still outstanding, California, and I think a handful of others around the country. There's a chance that the Democratic majority could be as small as 4 seats when it's all said and done. It's potentially very small. One bit of trivia is there were 435 races. Not a single Republican incumbent House member lost re-election, not one. There were a number of open House seats that were held by Republicans retiring that flipped. There were 2 North Carolina seats that had been redistricted that had Republican members right now. They flipped to Democratic control. There was 1 seat in the Atlanta suburbs that was held by a Republican who didn't run for re-election. That flipped, but not a single incumbent Republican lost. Also, the Republican Party is sending a lot more women to this Congress. Right now, there are 11 Republican women in the House. In the 117th Congress, it's way more than double. There's going to be at least 27 Republican women in the 117th Congress. So a real big change, and that's very probably going to go a little bit higher than 27. We'll see. There are a few very high-profile, or a couple of high-profile incumbents defeated. I think probably the single biggest one in the House, Colin Peterson from Minnesota. He was a 32-year House veteran in a very rural district that had been trending more and more Republican. He's also the chair of the House Ag Committee. So this is a really big change. And already there's a big scrum going on for who's going to succeed him as House Agriculture Committee chair. There are 2 people who are really vying for it hard. One is Jim Costa from California. The other is David Scott from Georgia. A couple of the things, I'm not a big farm bill commodity person, but still all this speculation is that Colin Peterson, representing Minnesota, that the House Ag Committee has always had a strong focus on northern commodities like corn, soybean, sugar beets, dairy. And if David Scott from Georgia becomes chair, that it's going to refocus to more southern commodities like cotton, rice. Although David Scott from Georgia has also, his focus is actually not so much on the commodity programs, it's more on the food and nutrition programs. People forget that the vast majority of funding in the federal farm bill does not go to commodity programs or conservation programs. It goes to food and nutrition programs like the SNAP program, which is food stamps, child nutrition. That's the bulk of the funding. That's one thing that David Scott wants to focus on. And in that regard, there's a third person who could have been vying for this, and that's Marcia Fudge, Congresswoman from Ohio, because she's also very senior on the House Ag Committee. But she has very specifically thrown her hat into the ring to be Secretary of Agriculture in the Biden administration. She is actively pursuing that. And her stated agenda is that she wants to have more of a focus on food and nutrition programs in the Department of Agriculture. And just as a little aside, actually saw a little interview with Jim Clyburn, congressman from South Carolina, the majority whip in the House, and probably the guy who was more singularly responsible for Joe Biden becoming president than anyone, because he really pushed him across the finish line in South Carolina. And he was asked continuously, who he's pushing for in the cabinet. He said, well, I'm making recommendations, but I'm not going to tell you who. And the reporter kept pushing and saying, well, Marcia Fudge is trying to be Secretary of Agriculture. Have you talked to the president-elect about Secretary of Agriculture? And he said, yes. And they said, have you recommended Marcia Fudge? And finally he said, yes. So Marcia Fudge has quite a proponent in Jim Clyburn to be Secretary of Agriculture. We'll see. Also, the other one that's going to impact us a bit is the House Appropriations Committee. The chair of the House Appropriations Committee, Nita Lowey, is retiring. So that's a vacancy at the top. Nita Lowey is from New York. She's not from within our watershed. She's just north of New York City. I think she's got Westchester County and Rockland and part of Orange and maybe Dutchess, but along the Hudson, the burbs of New York. And there are also two other subcommittee chairs on appropriations who are retiring. So there are folks vying for committee chair and folks vying for subcommittee chairs. So the subcommittee chairs they still have a lot of power. They used to have a lot of absolute power, and that's diminished over time. But these 12 subcommittee chairs used to be referred to as the College of Cardinals because of their power in basically divvying up all of the federal monies. It's a lot less so than it used to be, but there's still a lot of power in those positions. There are three folks vying for appropriations full committee chair, and that's Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut, Marcy Kaptur from Ohio, and Sherry Wasserman Schultz. Sherry Wasserman Schultz from South Florida. So nobody from our watershed, but we'll see what happens with that. A couple that will impact us a lot. Matt Cartwright from Pennsylvania got reelected. He will likely be one of the Cardinals. He is going to be the likely chair of the CJS subcommittee, the Commerce, Justice, and Science subcommittee. They have jurisdiction over NOAA, for one. So that's going to be, I think, a great benefit for us. The Interior Subcommittee of the House Appropriations Subcommittee, which is the subcommittee that funds our program. The current chair is Betty McCollum. She's Democrat from Minnesota, obviously very friendly for the Great Lakes. She's going to be moving on and taking the Defense Subcommittee, which means there's going to be a new chair there. It's likely to be Shelley Pengree from Maine. Probably all in all is not going to impact us. If I were representing the Great Lakes, I'd be a bit bummed, but we're not getting anybody from our watershed there, so we should be okay. And just, it's always good to keep in mind who the appropriators are from our watershed, and that's Bonnie Watson-Coleman, Matt Cartwright, and also Andy Harris from Maryland, who has a tiny little bit. But anyway, that's what we got on appropriations. So just a little bit about some of the dynamics here in the House races. So the 2020 landscape was kind of the polar opposite of the 2018 landscape when Democrats flipped the House and won 41 seats. In 2018, there were 23 incumbents who represented, 23 Republican incumbents who represented districts that Hillary Clinton won. Democrats targeted them above all else, and 20 of those 23 Republican incumbents lost. So that was a big part. That was basically half of the Democratic gains in 2018. Now we're in 2020, and it's kind of flipped. There were 30 Democrats representing districts that Trump won in 2016. And Republicans targeted them a lot. And we had 7 of them in our watershed. Maloney, Delgado, and Brindisi from New York, Cartwright from Pennsylvania, and Kim, Gottheimer, and Sherrill from New Jersey. Of those 30 Democrats that were targeted by Republicans, there actually were 31 originally, but Jeff Van Drew then switched parties, so he was no longer a Democrat being targeted. But of those 30, Democrats have won 19 of those races. They've retained 19 of those seats. Republicans have flipped 7 of them, and there are still 4 outstanding that we don't have the final results on. 3 of those are in New York, in our watershed. Also, to go back, in 2018, Democrats flipped 20 of those 23 Republican districts that Hillary Clinton had won. So there were 3 left to go. And Republicans retained all 3 of those districts in 2020. One was in our watershed, Brian Fitzpatrick in the Philly Burbs, and he won pretty handily. Also John Katko in New York, outside of our watershed. And then Will Hurd's district, he's retiring. That was on the border with Mexico, and that was retained by freshman Republican. So I'm just going to go over quickly some of the House races in our watershed that were a little bit closer than normal. We so far don't know if we had any change in the watershed. There are still a few outstanding races, mostly in New York. So Maloney, Delgado, and Brindisi, those 3 races have not yet been called. Maloney's ahead by about 3.5 points. Antonio Delgado by about 5. And Anthony Brindisi is down by a lot. He's down right now by 12 points. It was about 20 points a week ago. They're down to counting, as far as I know, counting absentee ballots, which have trended a lot heavily more Democratic. He basically would have had to take 80% of all the absentee ballots coming in, which is not out of the question. They're still counting ballots that has not been called. We'll see what happens. I think the odds are he's going to lose, and he's going to lose to Claudia Tenney, who was the Republican incumbent in 2018, who he beat, which would also be 28th female GOP member in this Congress. To go to New Jersey, Jeff Van Drew won re-election against Amy Kennedy, kind of handily by about 6 points, it looks like. Andy Kim actually won pretty solidly. I know that race was viewed as a toss-up for a long time until it got close to Election Day. Gottheimer won by about the same, about 8 points. Malinowski had a really tight race. I know they called him the winner early on. Then I think they rescinded that call, and then they have put it back. I just looked this morning. He is projected to be the winner over Tom Kean Jr. He's up by about 5,000 votes that I was able to see this morning. I don't know, folks in New Jersey, do you guys have any insight on that one?
Yeah, that's right, Peter. I think I saw 4,800, something like that, votes this morning for Malinowski that he was up. He actually gained some over the weekend. It was down to closer to 4,000 over the weekend. They still have votes that are outstanding. I'm not sure where the official count is, but it does look like Malinowski's probably going to pull it out in a much tighter race than I think anyone projected it to be, especially because I think after election night, he was up by like 20,000 votes, and his margin's 1/4 or less than what it was on election night. I don't know, Ed, you've been following that. I think you're still on, Ed Potosnik.
I'd like to hope that it's clear, like that they're calling it as clear. There's some lack of clarity around where the outstanding votes are from and how many there are, which is so interesting because we know more about Arizona and Nevada and Georgia than we do about New Jersey, which is fascinating. So I think we could say confidently, if we knew they were coming out of an area, that was leaning towards Malinowski more, and there were more votes there than areas that were leaning more towards Kane. But we don't know. There's just like no data. It's not publicly available. Malinowski's campaign sued to try to cure ballots, to get the lists of people with defects. And I haven't even heard the outcome of that lawsuit. And that is an indication that it's closer than it, that it's not guaranteed because they want to fix as many as possible. It's good measure. So yeah, I think it's likely he's up still, which is good, but there's just no way to know for sure because no one knows what's outstanding.
Yeah, and New Jersey, as you probably know for people on the call, Peter, but for others, New Jersey actually had the opposite of the red mirage because our voting was 100% by mail this year. And so all in-person voting that was done had to be done provisionally. And so Republicans who went to the polls on election day got counted as provisional votes. And so we actually had the exact opposite that we saw in like Pennsylvania. So that's why Malinowski's race became much closer, is because a lot of the provisional ballots that were coming in were election day votes.
And they're counted last.
Yeah.
Thank you. I hadn't realized that. And thank you for the red mirage comment too. I like that. The last one in New Jersey was Mikey Sherrill, who won by about 7 points. I guess an interesting thing in these New Jersey races too is you had two somewhat family dynasties. Amy Kennedy losing to Van Drew, which was really a family dynasty. So starting in January, so there was a time, so whenever JFK was elected to Congress, which was the late 40s, I think, there was a Kennedy in Congress every single year with a 2-year gap earlier this decade between Patrick Kennedy's retirement from Rhode Island and Joe Kennedy's election in Massachusetts. Joe Kennedy ran against Ed Markey for the Democratic nomination for Senate this year, and he lost. So he will no longer be a member of Congress in January. And with Amy Kennedy leaving, that's it. No more Kennedys left in Congress for a little while. And Tom Kean Jr., right? Was this his first big election?
He's been a major player in the state electoral system. This is his first time, I believe, running for Congress. His dad, of course, was governor of New Jersey.
His dad was undefeated in elections, right?
I believe so. Yeah. Ed, if you have anything to add, he's currently the Senate Minority Leader, right? He still holds the Senate Minority Leader position at the state level.
Just go through three quick Pennsylvania races. I mentioned before, Brian Fitzpatrick, he won a re-election. Even though he's representing a district that Hillary Clinton won, he won handily by about 13 points. Susan Wild had a slightly tighter race than I think was anticipated. She won by about 4 points. And Matt Cartwright had a red mirage race, as Drew said. For a couple of days after Election Day, he was way down. But then when they started counting absentees and early voting, he started to pull ahead. So he's up by about 4 points. He's been declared the winner. So we will have Matt Cartwright in the 117th Congress, and he will most likely be chairing the CJS subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, which is really good for all of us. So to move a little bit past the House, but related to House races, one thing that this year and this election will impact is redistricting. 2020 is a census year, and as with everything federal, the Trump administration has been playing all kinds of games with the census, and we're not sure how it's all going to wind up in the end, but that is the primary thing that impacts redistricting. The census itself will determine how many congressional districts every state has. Population shifts, very likely that Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina will gain one seat, one House seat. Texas will likely gain 2 seats. And there's a chance that Montana may gain a seat that they lost 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I think 1990 census. They used to have 2 seats, and they may be back to getting 1. Some of the states that are likely to lose starts getting up into our area, and that's Illinois, Minnesota, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and possibly even California and West Virginia. There's still going to be 435 House seats, but they're going to be reapportioned based on the census. And every state does reapportionment, or they do their congressional boundaries different. There's some states that have commissions. Some states, the legislature has total control. Some, the governor has a right of veto. Some, the governor has more power in the drawing of boundaries. There's some hybrid situations. I know Virginia passed a ballot initiative that's going to kind of create a semi-independent committee to do this, but the fallback will go to the legislature. There was a lot of anticipation and optimism on the Democratic Party's side that they were going to flip a whole bunch of state legislatures, and one of the biggest reasons for the optimism was that was going to impact redistricting. That did not happen. There was speculation that Pennsylvania was going to flip, Texas, Arizona. None of that happened. So right now, and this is generally speaking because of the hybrid nature of these states and the governor and how it all plays out, but Republicans control 30 state legislatures for the purpose of redistricting, and Democrats 19, where they have more or less total control. There's little differences in there, but this election did not really change how redistricting is going to happen cumulatively in the United States. So then that brings us to the first midterm election, which I was looking at this even before November 3rd, just because I'm a political nerd, but the party of the incumbent president almost always loses seats in the House in midterm elections. Since World War II, the president's party has lost an average of 27 House seats in the midterm elections. There's only 1 year where the president's party did not lose seats, and that was 2002, partially 9/11 related and the rally around the flag thing. So if the Democrats have a House majority of 4 to 10 seats, the chances are good the Republicans are going to flip control of the House in 2022. There's also another issue that would be a moot point if the Republicans do flip the House, but that is whether we will have a Speaker Pelosi in the next Congress, the 118th Congress in 2023. If folks remember, there was a lot of hand-wringing when the Democrats won in 2018, and a lot of more conservative Democrats, the Blue Dog Democrats, kind of to appease them, Pelosi said she would agree to serve only 2 more terms as Speaker of the House, and then she would hand over the gavel. She didn't necessarily say retire, but that's probably what it would be. She is 79 or 80, but the question is whether everybody's going to remember that she term limited herself and whether they'll hold her to that. But if the Republicans flip the House, my guess is retire anyway. And the Senate in 2022, we go back to what we have this year, which is, again, there are going to be 34 seats up in 2022, and Republicans have a majority of those seats up for re-election. 21 Republicans and 13 Democrats are up. Retirements already that we know of are going to lead to 3 open seats. Those are Republican retirements. In Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey's retiring. Richard Burr in North Carolina, and Charles Grassley in Iowa. Generally speaking, it's easier to flip one of those seats when it's an open seat rather than running against an incumbent. Kind of flies in the face of incumbents being vulnerable, but that's still traditional. Democrats are very happy that the incumbents are not running in those 3 races, except maybe in North Carolina where Richard Burr has some ethics issues, but he was retiring even before that. Also, oddly, in 2022, 2 of the elections this year, the Arizona election, which Mark Kelly won, that was actually a special election because that was Martha McSally was filling John McCain's seat. So that was a special election for the remainder of the term, which is only till 2022. And also the same with the Georgia seat, the Warnock-Loeffler race, that's filling Johnny Isakson's seat. So whoever wins that will be up for re-election 2 years later in 2022. So we'll be back at it in 2022, possibly the same folks up for re-election, who knows? Anyway, that's what I got.
Thanks. Thanks as always for the comprehensive look at the state of the watershed. So in the interest of time, let's save questions all the way at the end for the end, but if folks have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. But at this point, we're going to pivot over to our states. And in particular, we have our 4 state leads on the call today. And I'll just go down the watershed geographically and start with our friends at the Friends of the Upper Delaware River. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and Molly and Sherry here, and take it away.
Great, thanks, Sandra. So we'll be quick here. We put a couple maps together to let you all know what the outcomes of Election Day were at the state level in the New York State Legislature. Very, very important to us. A little preamble to that. Some of you might remember we're very excited about Governor Cuomo proposing a $3 billion Environmental Bond Act. He called it the Restore Mother Nature Bond Act. That was slated to be on the ballot for November 3rd, but the COVID situation caused him to remove that. So we're hoping that makes a reappearance next year. That would be a significant source of funding for potential funding for Upper Delaware River as a statewide bond act. So I hope everyone can see this map. This is the New York State Assembly and how things are broken out. I'll try to translate all of this for you really simply. First of all, here's a trivia question for Molly. If you have the cursor, Molly, can you show everybody where Donald Trump Jr. has a house and fishes up here constantly? We see him all the time. His Secret Service black limos are often parked at the Hancock, New York hotel while he's staying at his house and enjoying the river. I hope, Molly, I'm not sure if Molly knows
exactly. It's in this neck of the woods though, right?
Yes, that's about where Donald Trump Jr. has a house, and we see him quite frequently up here. So there you go. We tried, for those of you who are thinking, hey, why don't we try to use him to help the river. We thought of that along with about 1,000 other people when Trump got elected. And we actually have some folks who were able to text him. And early on, we did text him. And he wrote back and said, I'm under a microscope. I can't do anything on policy. Sorry. That was his answer about 4 years ago. And I don't think anything has changed. Anyway, okay, back to the subject at hand. The big white blob on the left, of course, is Northeast Pennsylvania, and Emily and Ezra will take care of that. And the big white blob in the lower right-hand corner is the Hudson River watershed. All the colors are all wholly or partly in the upper Delaware River watershed in the state of New York. So the black line that goes around outside there, that is the watershed perimeter, which, by the way, this is where our 14 new entering the Delaware River watershed signs are placed all around that line in the state of New York. The yellow line runs right through the base of the big, giant New York City water supply reservoirs. The one on the left is Cannonsville, the one in the middle is Papacton, and down lower to the right in the blue section is the Neversink Reservoir, hard to see. And that's the Neversink River running down directly south there. That yellow line above that is often referred to as the New York City watershed. It is the Delaware River watershed, but that's the land area that the city protects, invests tens of billions of dollars over the last 40 years to protect water quality for their reservoirs and their drinking water supply for the city. Below the yellow line is we often refer to as the tailwaters, which is, at least to my knowledge, is a angling term that refers to a river below a dam. So that whole section below that yellow dotted line is the Delaware River watershed below the New York City water supply reservoirs. So the important districts here are the pink one there, Gunther, Assemblywoman Aileen Gunther, very important to us in our funding campaign in Albany, is going to be a cheerleader for us. She won unopposed. And the orange section above her is a Republican district, always has been, or has been as long as I can remember. And a new guy, Angelino, won a vacated seat there. So those are kind of important folks to us, but let's not forget the other colors too. And you can see the breakdown of the parties there. In the New York State Legislature, I don't know if it's the same for the rest of you, but Democrats control everything from top to bottom, from the governor's office to both houses of the legislature. And it's run with an iron fist. And if you are in the minority party, you have zero power. Some would argue less than zero power. And so we do have that situation in our watershed where we have to kind of deal with that political dynamic in the New York State legislature, with the Republicans, of course, being in the minority party. I think we can go to the next map. So this is our New York State Senate. This is where we're kind of sitting on pins and needles here, and we might be taking a hit, and we're a little bit worried, but it's not over yet. We're still counting. There's all kinds of, like everywhere else, I guess, there's the mail-in ballots are still being counted, and we still are a week away from understanding the outcomes here for some of these races. The pink area is the big one for us, and that is a very tight race. Republican Martucci is ahead right now, but there's a whole bunch. I think there's 30,000 absentee ballots that still need to be counted. And Molly found out today that in the hallowed halls of the Sullivan County, New York legislature, they are actually, Martucci there filed a lawsuit prior to the election saying we're going to count these things one by one. So in the 4 counties in that pink district, which are slightly delineated, kind of hard to tell. The big one is Sullivan County. That's where you see the names Martucci and Metzger. We're told that they're reading every ballot right now in the hallway outside the county legislature and reading them out loud with tons of observers sitting all around. And that's going to take a long time. So Senator Jennifer Metzger has been a champion for us, has been tremendous in her first term. Hopefully it's not her last term. And she is slated to be is committed to being our cheerleader in Albany for everything we do up there for the upper Delaware River. So that one we're going to keep a sharp eye on. And that's probably the most notable race that's going on. Peter, I know you have a house in the green area, I believe. It looks like Oberecker is probably going to win that one. In the blue area, some might remember the Congressman Maurice Hinchey, the great conservation hero in New York State who died a few years ago. That's his daughter over there on the Hudson, bordering on the Hudson with some Delaware. She is likely to win. And over in the purple, Binghamton, Broome County, Fred Akshar is easily won that district. And he has that weirdly gerrymandered purple square there where our office sits. FUDR's office is there at the confluence of the West Branch and the East Branch, right there. Yep, that's where I'm sitting right now. So that makes life a little bit tough for us again because of the way state government works in Albany and who has the power and who doesn't. So we'll keep an eye on that Martucci-Metzger race. That's the big one. We should know, what is it, Molly? A week from now, maybe? Is that right?
I believe we're supposed to know by the 28th.
The 28th, okay. So we'll let everybody know. That's going to have a lot to do with how our work proceeds and protecting and restoring the upper Delaware River at the state level here and in Albany, New York. So I think with that, Sandra, and I think that does it. I can answer any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Molly. Any questions?
The only other thing I'll say, Peter, is that I think that Brindisi race is close. I think that's going to come down to, he's gaining ground rapidly. So
Pretty far behind, though. I looked this morning and it was still like 20,000 votes, but he cut back from like 28,000 down.
yeah, I think some of those ballots are from from Broome County and Cortland, I think. So we'll see. But yeah, he's trying to make a comeback here. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm going to hand it over to our folks with Penn Future, and Ezra Thrush is on the line. So Ezra, take it away.
Thanks, everybody. I will be quick. I have to head off to a hearing to try to stop anti-environmental folks from Harrisburg from gutting our clean streams law, be it where. So I will start here. We have lost a few seats, pro-environment seats in Pennsylvania during this election. Before the election, Democrats in the House were sitting at 93 members. We lost 4 seats, Democratic seats, but we picked up 1 Republican seat. So the Democrats now have 90 seats in the House, and the Republicans have 113 seats. So a few seats just to mention that changed in the Pennsylvania House. We have Leader Dermody, longtime leader of the minority party of the Democrats based in suburban Pittsburgh. He lost his race by a couple thousand votes. He had Allegheny and Westmoreland counties on the western part of the state, not in the Delaware River Watershed. He lost his seat to an ad and marketing a person. Her name is Carrie Del Rosso, so she's going to be taking over. We also had lost a longtime member of Westmoreland, a Democrat from Westmoreland, Joseph Petrarca, a longtime steel and coal Democrat from ancestral Democratic area in Westmoreland County. He also lost to a Trump-supporting figure, Jason Silvis. So Jason Silvis, a Republican, will be going to the House to take that seat. At the end of this year, we also heard that Neil Goodman, he's a longtime Democrat from Schuylkill County, which is in northeastern Pennsylvania. I think part of Schuylkill County is actually in the Delaware River Watershed. He's from the Mahanoy City area, if you know that part of the world at all. He decided to retire. He didn't like the direction that the Democratic Party was going and that folks in Harrisburg and his party were going, so he decided to retire. He took a job elsewhere. With that seat, I think it was Trump plus 20. So that district had been hard for the Democrats to try to hold on to. So folks almost knew that once Goodman was going to retire, it was going to be a Republican pickup. So there's a gentleman by the name of Neil Twardzik who picked up that seat. Polish ancestry. It's a big coal mining town. If you know anything about Schuylkill County, it's big into coal mining. And something unfortunate, probably besides Leader Dermody losing his seat, the part that I'm most upset about is longtime Delaware River champion Wendy Allman, a Democrat from Bucks County. She represents the area between Doylestown to the river in Bucks County. She's a little bit north of New Hope, but she represents a good bit of the Tohickon Creek and a part of the canal along the Delaware. She got unseated by a Republican. Her name is Sharon Labs, who used to be a local government commissioner. So we will not have Representative Wendy Ullman any further in the legislature. She was a longtime advocate. If you remember, if you've been following the Pennsylvania politics the last year or two, you might have remembered when we were trying to sound all the alarms about Republicans in the legislature trying to come after the DRBC because of DRBC's fracking position. Wendy Ullman led the fight against that effort, and she was successful in defeating that bill with a lot of our help and a couple other Democrats in the Delaware Basin. So those Democrats are leaving. New Republicans are coming in. We have one Democratic pickup, though, in the House, and her name is Nancy Gunst. Nancy Gunst is taking over the House District 152. Part of it is in Philadelphia County. Part of it is in Montgomery County in the southeastern part of the state. She's taking over the seat that was held by Tom Mert. Tom Mert was a pretty moderate Republican. He was very good on environmental issues, easy to talk to. Tom Mert had decided to retire as well. He's been in the legislature 10 plus years. So that's a big pickup for the Democrats there in District 152. So again, the House is now 113 Republicans to 90 Democrats. And just a fun fact, you might have seen in the news, Pennsylvania just elected its first Black woman to be a leader of a party, a floor leader in Harrisburg. So Joanna McClinton, who is a state rep from Delaware and Philadelphia counties. Her district actually includes Bartram's Garden. If you're familiar with Bartram's Garden along the Schuylkill in Philly, we've done a lot of our partners have done clean water projects and events there. She represents that district. She is now the floor leader for the Democrats in the PA House. So that's very exciting. We'll have a friend in that role. Over to the Senate. We have a lot of new members in the Senate. Even though we have a lot of new members, at the end of the day, we lost a Democrat and we lost a Republican. So the party's basically flipped. The party control doesn't change. The numbers don't change at all in the Pennsylvania Senate. Right now, we have 30 Republicans and 20 Democrats. We have one outstanding race. It's out in the Pittsburgh suburbs. We have the incumbent is Democrat Jim Brewster, and we also have the challenger is Republican Nicole Ziccarelli. Ziccarelli's been doing a lot of work with the party there. She's also connected to some of the trade unions. The difference between those two races is about 30 votes right now. There's still 2,000 plus votes to be counted, mostly Allegheny County votes. So it's expected that they're probably going to favor Jim Brewster, the Democratic incumbent. But if Ziccarelli pulls it out, she could be unseating a second Democrat in the Pittsburgh suburbs. And I will just mention the other Democrat who just lost her seat was Pam Iovino. Pam Iovino a few years ago took over the seat that Guy Reschenthaler had, who was a Republican. Guy Reschenthaler a few years ago left his term early to go serve as a member of Congress for Pennsylvania 18, the district that's just south of Pittsburgh, the South Hills. So Iovino, the Democrat, lost in the South Hills, and that's been taken over by a gentleman by the name of Devlin Robinson. So a loss there for the Democrats. Republicans had one pickup, and you'll see this trend. Republicans have been picking up more in the western part of Pennsylvania, the Appalachian part of the state. Democrats have been making gains in the southeastern part of the state, in the parts of the state that are more in line with the Excel Express or the Piedmont or the Delaware, or there's very much a take that there's two different Pennsylvanias, western and an eastern. So the Democrats did take out Senator Tom Killian. Tom Killian represented Chester and Delaware counties. He was largely based in Kennett Square. Replacing him is a gentleman. He used to be a business manager for think Plumbers or Pipe Fitters Union. His name is John Kane. But John Kane had been endorsed by the conservation voters of PA, and a lot of groups that are affiliated with those politics. John Kane will be great on the issues. He'll be starting over in January, be sworn in January as the new Democratic senator for that part of Chester and Delaware counties along the Kennett Square area, if you're familiar with Longwood Gardens. I will mention very quickly, we have 3 new Democratic members. They had primary Democrats earlier this year. So we have a brand new Democratic Senator, Amanda Capoletti. She's in her 30s. She unseated earlier this year longtime Senator Dalen Leach, who was from the King of Prussia area in the Philly suburbs. Also, Nikhil Saval, who is a Bernie-type Democrat, unseated Larry Farnese from Senate District 1 in Center City in South Philly earlier this year. And Carolyn Comida, you might have heard that name before. She was a longtime environmental champion in the House in Chester County. She had Westchester and Westchester suburbs. She left her House seat to run for the Senate seat in Westchester area. Andy Dinneman, who was a longtime senator for Chester County, he had retired as well. And Carolyn Comida, who's a big fan of ours, and we're a big fan of hers, she's moving up into the Senate seat for Chester County. Again, 100% rating for CVPA scores, and we're excited about her. And another fun fact for the Senate also broke history last week by nominating its first female floor leader. Her name is Kim Ward, and she's from the Pittsburgh suburbs in Westmoreland County. So we'll have 2 new female floor leaders in Pennsylvania, which is pretty exciting. So that's all I have. And we'll have, while the numbers don't change a whole lot in control in our legislature, we'll still have a Democratic governor, Republican House, Republican Senate. Not much new we'll be able to get done, unfortunately. Play a lot more defense as usual, but a few things are changing. So that's all I have for now. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you, Ezra. Thanks as always for your expertise. I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca Hilbert at New Jersey League of Conservation Voters now. Rebecca.
Hi, yeah, let me just get my screen up. Can everyone see? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Rebecca Hilbert with the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. Most of you are familiar with the work that I do with the State Lead program for CDRW, but I'm also on our policy team here at LCV. So I do a lot of work in elections, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. For the out-of-state groups who aren't too familiar with New Jersey LCV's mission, we're known as the statewide political voice for the environment. We work to elect environmentally responsible candidates to office, and then we advocate for strong environmental policies, and then we hold elected officials accountable for how they prioritize the environment once they're in office. So it's really our election work that I'm going to talk to you quickly about today. It was a really quiet year for New Jersey. For those familiar with New Jersey LCV's endorsement process, you know that most of our endorsements are usually made on the state level in the Assembly, the governor, the Senate. There weren't any races this year on the state level except for a special LD 25 election. And then our national chapter of LCV works on the federal elections that Peter talked to us about today, and we provide ground support if needed for those. So this year we decided to focus mainly on local elections. We did endorse one local candidate in the past, and that was Mayor Fulop of Jersey City. And so this year with no state races really happening, it was really our chance to dig deeper. And we know a lot of change really happens on the local level. So we're really excited to get started our first year doing that. I'll give you a brief overview of where we endorsed, but for time's sakes, I'm not going to take you through each race. If you're interested in seeing all of our local endorsements, you can head over to our website. They're all there. Let's just go through some stats here. Out of numerous applications, we received, we endorsed about 28 candidates in 18 races. 75% were challengers and 25% were incumbents. And we endorsed in 13 municipal races, 4 county races, and 1 special assembly election that we talked about. 1/3 of our endorsed candidates were people of color, and 40% of them were women. So just looking at some of the highlights, unfortunately, it does look like Darcy Drager lost the special election LD25 against Assemblywoman Dunn. She's a great champion of the environment. We've endorsed her before, but like last year, she couldn't quite get over the finish line. It was very close, and Senator Bucco won his re-election LD25 as well. And then interesting enough, in Somerset County, two of our endorsees, Paul Drake and Doug Singletary, won their election to freeholder, which is not going to be called freeholder next year, making it a Democratic majority. And then in Burlington County, all of our candidates won their races, which was really exciting for us. And this includes, as you can see, Mount Laurel, Morristown, Lumberton, and Eastham Town Council. So many of these races, like so many across the state, haven't officially been called yet, though the trailing candidates unfortunately aren't likely to flip at this point. But we do have a current win rate of about 61%, which I think isn't bad when you've endorsed mostly challengers. And I think what we really want to get across here is that if anybody has a candidate that's running in the next year, we want to say you can just reach out to us. And if you're interested in running yourself, we'll provide support if we can, and we'll see how we can help. And we're always looking for more Republican candidates, I think. We try to be as bipartisan as possible. We all know that the environment should not be a partisan issue. Unfortunately, we just had one applicant this year with freeholder Sean Van Doren. So we're really looking to increase our Republican candidates moving on. So we're just going to go a little bit through New Jersey voter turnout history because it's just important to know. And in 2016, it was Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, and we had broken the record with 68% voter turnout. It was the most ballots cast ever in the state. And then we really dropped down in 2017, and that was Governor Murphy's first election with 35.8%. It was a record low turnout for a gubernatorial election year. And we go back up in 2018. We had the highest turnout rate for an election since 1982 for midterms, if you guys remember the blue wave. And then 2019, we had the second lowest on record turnout for the general election. And that was really because of we just had the Senate and we had the Assembly up. So a lot of people just didn't get out for that. And then 2020 was different. It was a lot easier to vote in New Jersey, as we talked about, with everyone being mailed a ballot. And as of last week, the official number was over 4 million, but they're still counting. So we know that it is another record, and we were expecting that with the way the election was held this year. And then we had our ballot questions. You know, the one, like so many other states in the country, New Jersey did vote yes to legalize marijuana. So that's going to be interesting to see how that process plays out. And then like Peter talked about, we had a ballot question talking about schedule changing for the redistricting because of the census data being a little iffy right now. We did vote to allow that schedule change in New Jersey. So setting up for 2021 elections, because this year was so quiet, next year it's going to be a madhouse. We have the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly up. And we really just wanted to show this graphic looking forward to the 2021 governor election. We wanted to know, we wanted to show it because it demonstrates a really interesting pattern between the relationships of US presidents and New Jersey governors dating back since 1984. It starts when George Bush was voted in and New Jersey flipped to blue with James Florio. When Bill Clinton was elected in 1992 and 96, Jersey went back to red with Christie Todd Whitman, and the pattern holds again with Republican George Bush Jr. comes in, and New Jersey's next three governors during that time period are Democrats. Finally, Barack Obama comes into office 2008, and Chris Christie is elected to New Jersey governor for the next 8 years. So with Joe Biden being the president-elect, we have to wonder if the switching pattern will stay. There are other factors here, of course. You know, Governor Murphy gained a lot of popularity for the way he handled COVID, despite the small, really loud minority who believes otherwise in New Jersey. And some people might just have a different view of the Republican Party after a Trump presidency. So we really don't know what's going to happen here. So we're just going to have to keep our eyes open in 2021. And hopefully with more state level races happening next year, we'll have a lot more to talk about on our next CDRW elections recap. So with that, I think I'll hand it back, Sandra.
Thank you, Rebecca, for all the details. And last but certainly not least, I'm going to hand it over to our friend Emily Nurl with Delaware Nature Society. So Emily, take it away.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. So in Delaware, the environment had a really, really great election night. Our governor was reelected, Governor John Carney, so we expect steadiness on the executive branch side of things, steady as she goes. On the legislative side, though, we had a really, really great night. We picked up 3 seats in the House and 3 seats in the Senate that were environmental votes, and we're really excited about. The party that favors the environment in Delaware, of course, it's the Democrats, as in many places. The Delaware State Senate, they now have a supermajority. And more importantly, our President Pro Tem, our majority leader, and our majority whip are all solid, progressive environmental votes. If the gods had turned to me and said, would you like me as leadership leading your state Senate? I would have said, yes, I would have loved it, but I never would have thought it had happened. But combination of some primaries as well as some really exciting votes. So we're feeling really good about our state Senate leadership. Our state House leadership will remain Democrat as well as they're the majority, but we got 3 really good pickups there as well. So we think that on the administrative executive branch, there won't be a lot of changes, but we're looking to work with our state legislature for some really exciting progress as we go forward. A couple quick unknowns, like our state budget, our fiscal year is basically June 30 to July 1. So we're concerned about our state budget, absolutely, because of COVID. We don't know who's going to sit on our Joint Finance Committee yet, and we don't know who's going to sit on our capital, our bond bill, as we call them, our capital committee yet. But those folks will have a huge amount of influence on how things that go forward. But in Delaware, overall, it was a really good night. We're very pleased, very happy. Couldn't have gone better, let's put it that way.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily. So we have about 10 minutes remaining. If folks have questions and want to take themselves off mute or type questions into the chat box, you are more than welcome. If folks have anything else to add, now is the time.
This is Peter. I wanted to ask Rebecca about the turnout. Rebecca, did you have the numbers in New Jersey for turnout this year, the percentage? You're on mute.
I don't have the percentage quite yet, just the number. We're still waiting for the final numbers to come in, unless somebody else has heard something different for New Jersey.
2016? Did that beat 2016?
Yes, we did beat 2016 so far.
Thanks.
Great. So any questions, comments, further feedback or intel from folks?
I just want to say I find it exhausting to be excited about the presidential elect results, but also worried about 2022 and probably losing the House. Peter, I think you're spot on. I'm nervous about what the House could happen with the House. It's funny how you can get good news and bad news at the same time.
Yeah. But there was one exception since World War II. There could be 2.
That's actually a pretty good point. This is Nikki from Ducks Unlimited. Sorry, let me turn my camera on. In light of that historical fact there, we may want to start thinking, even though this is about a year and a half away until actual campaigns start really ramping up, but if we do see a change of control in the House, we may want to start identifying Republican members who would probably take over leadership positions or important decision-making positions to start advocating for our priorities too. Obviously, if it doesn't happen, then we're pretty much set. But if it does, we should be able to hit the ground running in 2023 to ensure that we don't see any lapse or any change in our appropriations or authorization status.
I think, Nikki, I think that's a good point. But also, I think we've been, as a rule, pretty bipartisan in our approach in Congress and approach everyone. And so far, it's worked. And it's a pretty nonpartisan, bipartisan program.
Yeah, and Nikki, I would just say the only challenge, at least for CDRW priorities or Delaware River Watershed, is there aren't a whole lot of Republicans left, just generally in the watershed. So I guess, Ezra, if you're still on, I think it mostly goes to you. Since we're down to, I think, just one still. Well, I guess two in New Jersey with Van Drew. So.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Drew.
Hey, Peter, it's Jeff. I may have missed it. I'm sorry, earlier on. What are the names floating around on the streets for EPA, if any?
Who knows, but I just saw a Washington Post had an article about it. They had Mary Nichols, who was the air.
California.
Yeah,
right?
air at EPA headquarters, and now she's in California. Actually, Colin O'Mara's name was floated in that. Mustafa Ali. Those are the names I saw, and I'm sure there's a gazillion others out there.
Yeah, I'm sure we're a ways away. I just wondered if you heard any,
It's also, just with that list, I think who controls the Senate, because that would have to be confirmed by the Senate, would make a big difference in who would be nominated.
Thanks.
And Jeff, by the way, so if you see those Suburbans parked in front of the Hancock Hotel, you're going to share the FDR and Herbert Hoover trivia with Donnie Jr. for me, please?
I sure will, Peter. He stops by the office often for consultation, so I'll make sure I do that.
Great. Any other questions, comments? Alrighty, well, I put all of the speaker names into the chat, so feel free to copy paste, and I'll also follow up via email so you have all of those. But I just really want to thank all of our speakers. I'm doing a little silent clap here, and everyone for making the time to join us this afternoon. So thanks again, and take care and stay safe.
Thanks, Sandra. Thanks, everybody.